Our first story has multiple parts with a crazy fallout at the end. Entitled Neighbor, Part 1, posted by Ellen Gass. My parents, until recently, lived in the same house for 50 plus years. We had 3 neighbors on the north side over that time. The first was a little old woman we'll call Eleanor. She was a hermit, and as such, us young kids were always scared of her. She died when I was a freshman in high school. It took a few years, and then we had a new guy buy the property named Richard. One day, we found him cutting down bushes on our property. The houses had about 10 feet between them. Our property line was 6 feet from our house, and he had 4 feet. The bushes were 1 foot into our property. Eleanor never had an issue with them. She was a nature lover. She never mowed her backyard. She only mowed the front. It was a push mower, non-power, at 6 a.m. My dad and I confronted him and let him know that those were our bushes that he was cutting down, and we were not happy about it. He didn't care. He needed to do it so that he could get his cars into his backyard. We said, "You have a curb cut out on the other side of your house. You can mow it and have a straight access to the backyard as the original builder intended." He stormed off, and the next day, the bushes were all gone. We watched him drive his cars on our property to his backyard. Oh yeah, these were the cheap Porsches of the mid-1980s, base model 944s. Then Dad and I decided that we needed metal fence posts to mark the property line. We put them 5 inches on our side of the property line and drove them down really deep. There was very little room for him to get anything past them, especially his cars. When Richard got home, we could hear the yelling and cussing for quite a few hours. And then we heard a car start up in the back, and he successfully got one of his cars out, but not with serious damage to the side, nice sized scrapes all along the side of the car. Our newly planted fence leaned in toward our property. I really wish at that time that we had stuff we have today. I'd really like to have a video of that. In any event, we contacted police about the damage of our property, our newly constructed fence, and they gave him a ticket. He tried to claim that we damaged his car and that the officer pointed out that he had no right to use our property unless we gave permission, and it's obvious that we had not. He got the other car out not too long after. Same deal, scraped sides to all heck. This was just the beginning of the issues that we had with him. Now this is going to include the fence. Ultimately, we pulled out the metal fencing and put in treated wood fence posts. We sunk them 4 feet into the dirt and then used a wood lattice panel between them. All of this was up to city code at the time. We also extended the fence well into the front yard. Again, Richard was ticked. He began stacking concrete, rocks, and wood up against the fence, which is still 5 inches inside of our property line. Over time, it made the fence sag more into our yard, and he continued to pile it higher and higher until one day the fence broke. All of his crap fell into our yard. Dad wasn't home at the time, so I took it upon myself to relocate everything back into his yard. So one by one, it all ended up near his front porch. As I was getting close to being done, he steps out of his house as a nice sized rock happens to hurtle right by him. Well, this ticked Richard off. Cops were called, and they arrived after I had finished relocating everything. When the cop came to interview me, I just pointed to the fence that was damaged. The weight of the crap that he kept putting up against the fence that was well within our property line caused it to fail, I said. I was just relocating the mess that spilled into our yard back into his. By this time, the cops had been out a few times and knew what was going on. They pointedly asked if he had caused the broken fence, and I said yes. I mean, it was the truth. I explained what had happened. They dismissed my throwing a rock at him and wrote a citation for destruction of property. He was fuming when the cops left, and as he usually would do, he left for a couple of hours. Dad got home and I told him the story, and we had a good laugh. Now this was a fun one too. Richard acquired some signs that said "No parking by the order of the police" and put them out front of his house. At that time, I was driving an old 4-cylinder Datsun pickup, green for those who need that, and I was parking out front of our house. The neighborhood, over the years, has moved from single family to students renting places. We live in a college town and we're an easy walking distance to the school. We had a lot of students parking on our street, so sometimes my truck was parked out in front of our house or in front of his. With my sister now driving as well, it was just easier to park on the street instead of playing Tetris with cars. Anyway, a few days after the signs popped up, I noticed he was still parking his cars, with the scrape marks still on the side of the mall, out front. Okay, fair game. I parked out there as well. He called the cops, and the ticket lady came out and issued me a ticket. When I asked her why, she pointed at the signs. I asked if they were official and if he had the permit for them, and she checked, and no, in fact, he did not. Then the cop showed up. He was questioned why he needed the signs and how he acquired them. He pointed to his house. Let me get sidetracked for a moment. He had been working on renovating his house for 2 years at this point. The house was small, like efficiency apartment small. 1 or 2 main rooms, a bathroom, and so on. I had been in the house on a few occasions when Eleanor was living there. He had this, I don't know what to really call it, like a beam. It was meant to lift his roof while he did the internal work on the house. It extended 10 feet out front and back. This beam was constructed of repurposed wood, small pieces and large pieces, scraps of all kinds. It looked like a puzzle, and while it may have carried a load, it was not structurally sound. It was a local joke about what he was doing and how. Now it reminded me of the forts that we would build at a friend's house, where any piece of scrap wood was fair game and it could be made to work. Back to the story. He got 2 tickets from the cops and 3 from the city. One, I overheard, was for no permit. Now this one happened after most of the other stuff and near the end of his time there. I worked as a student operator in a computer lab. I had the late shift a number of nights of the week. It was good money for babysitting computers. Since it was a college campus, we had to park a fair distance away. One night, I looked up and happened to see Richard in the lab. I should also mention that by this time, we had a full family no contact order on him. I didn't think he was a student, but we got a lot of non-students in the lab since we had publicly accessible computers. No logins needed to use them. He was typing like it was going out of style. Then he got up and he left. We did have cameras at the entrances, so I saw him leave. I went over to his machine and I pulled the file from the trash that he'd been working on. I printed a copy out and I read it. It was about all the trouble that the neighbors were making. Hey, that's us, and how he can't get anything done because we keep turning him in. Then the letter went legal. He was trying to write like it was a letter from a lawyer or something. I laughed it off. He didn't show up again that I recall when I was there. One night a few weeks after that, I signed out of my shift and I went home. It was after 1 a.m. I noticed him sitting in the parking lot in one of his cars smoking. Okay, I thought to myself, this is interesting. I hopped in my Datsun pickup and started it up, and it was loud. My muffler had finally let go. I took off out of that lot, trying to not over-rev to make it loud at 1 a.m. for anyone but me. I noticed that he took off at the same time and went the same direction. Okay, this is the way home, but I decided to test to see if he was following me, and yup. I took the most out of the way home, using main streets instead of the side streets, which would have been like 10 times quicker, only to have him keep on following. I went around the block close to the house to make sure that I wasn't dreaming this, and no, he followed me right to the house. I parked in the driveway this time, and he parked where he could in front of his house. I woke Dad up, and then we called the cops. I told the cops that I was taking a long way home due to the muffler and not wanting to tick anyone off, but that I also did a loop around the block, and sure enough, he was following me. They arrested him for a no-contact violation, and when I told them about the previous encounter the weeks before at work, they added a second charge. When it went to court, I wasn't the only one there to testify. They lumped another case of his in with it: destruction of public property. After all that had happened, he no longer had a driver's license. He got ticked because he had to take public transportation. He got even more ticked when the driver wouldn't stop between 2 stops to let him out. He kicked the windows out of the bus. He went to jail for about 3 months. After that, he lost the house and his cars. We would see him from time to time walking all over town, banned from the bus, banned from his house and his cars. Pastor's wife hops our fence, calls the cops on us, and maybe more, posted by Social Anxiety Kyle. My wife and our kids, all under age 10, went on vacation to Florida. While we are gone, I have my parents coming over twice a day to feed them, dogs, and give them water when they need it. The dogs are outside, but they have access to a large backyard and sunroom. They're living the life, basically. Also important to note that we live in a nice area. It's a decent house in a cul-de-sac in a small town in Indiana. I get a call from my neighbor, who is a pastor, and he tells me that our dogs have been barking at night and keeping our surrounding neighbors awake. He also said that it didn't look like our dogs had been getting fed or watered, and that his wife went into our 8-foot-tall fenced backyard to give the dogs water and food. He tells me that his wife told him this as he isn't home and he has been out of town for work while we were on vacation. So, he's calling me to report what his wife told him. Thought it was kind of odd because his wife has my wife and I's phone numbers. I played it off that she didn't like confrontation. To me, it wasn't that much of a confrontation, but whatever. I also thought going in our backyard was a little much, but I'm friends with my pastor neighbor, so I just kind of brushed it off. So I tell my pastor neighbor, "Thanks for letting me know. I appreciate you having the stones to let me know. I don't want to be a bad neighbor. I'll have my parents put the dogs in the garage at night so they won't bark, and that the dogs have been fed by my parents every day since we've been gone." And I thought that that was the end of it. Not even close. I get a call from my parents a few hours later when they came to our house to feed the dogs. They said they pulled up our mountain of a driveway, and as soon as they got out, my neighbor from directly across the street started screaming at them about how the dogs aren't being fed or watered. I still don't understand why they're saying this. If you went in our backyard, you'd see a plethora of food and water in the sunroom. When my parents started heading to the backyard, they thought they heard something. My dad creeps his head over the fence to see my neighbor, pastor's wife, in our backyard. He tells her to get out and threatens to call the police as she is trespassing. She leaves. Remember, this is all after my conversation with my pastor neighbor and after he reported what I said to his wife. My parents are in the backyard dealing with the dogs and notice that they called the police. My parents at this point are waiting for the officer to stop talking to the neighbors and come to my house. He finally does. The first thing the officer says to my parents is, "You got some nosy butt neighbors." He explains what they said, and my mom invites him into my house and into my backyard to show him that the dogs are being taken care of. At first he declines, saying that he believes my parents, but eventually he came inside. My parents had a good conversation with him. He talked about how my family and I don't need to worry about this, and that we should be having fun on vacation. He even opened up about his family and his little girl. This is nuts, and I'm ticked at my neighbors for all this crap at this point. We finally come home from vacation and are home for 3 weeks, and I still haven't seen my neighbors, which is odd. My neighbor to the left of us walks his dog frequently, and I see him almost every day. I haven't seen him at all. So I text my pastor neighbor, and I say, "How's it going?" Because he hasn't said anything to me since I figured out his wife hopped our fence again, and that she called the police. So he has the idea for me and him to talk in person. So we start talking in my front yard, and he starts telling me everything that happened. Once again, he wasn't home, so this is what he knows from his wife. He apologizes for his wife. Weird, why isn't his wife apologizing to us? And he tells me the same information that I've already shared, except 3 things. First off, his wife accidentally let the dogs out and she took them inside their house for a bit. They were back in our backyard before my parents got there and before we got back. Weird, but whatever, I guess. Then he mentions that he and his wife have a rule that she isn't allowed to drink unless he is home, and that one of the days that we were gone, she had been drinking. This was news to me. And then he told me what the cop said to the group of neighbors that were speaking with the cop. He said it like this: "I'm telling you this because you're my friend and there's no judgment here and you take it how you want. The cop said that when he went into your house, he had to hold his nose, it smelled so bad. It was unsanitary, and that the cop said this is a house they know about and used the term drug house to describe my home. I felt good about the conversation except that last part. So I questioned him on that again, and I said, did the cop only say this to your wife, or were there more neighbors? He told me that it was her and my neighbor to the left of me that heard this. Red flags are going off in my head as I walk back to my house. We have 3 young kids, so our house isn't super clean, but it's not too bad and it's definitely not unsanitary. Also, why would an officer leave my house after talking to my parents and say that about our house to our neighbors? An officer's job is to de-escalate the situation, and this just didn't seem like something an officer would do or say. Not to mention, none of it is even remotely true. The next day, I get a text from my pastor neighbor saying this. Kyle, thanks for your time yesterday. I appreciate friends being able to weigh into awkward issues. On another note, though the police officer did say the things I shared with you, it really wasn't germane to the conversation or issue at hand, Kyle. I didn't need to share those things. My apologies, bro. Now, I'm really questioning if the officer said this. This is a weird thing to even apologize for. Even if you think, I shouldn't have mentioned that part, why would you take the time to apologize for it? I responded very honestly and said, hey, I appreciate you willing to face confrontation. And no, I'm glad you shared with me what the police said. I don't believe they said that in the slightest amount for many reasons, to be, completely honest. It may have been best for me to keep my opinion to myself, but I was still kind of ticked off. He replies, hey Kyle, just to be clear, your text is saying that the police officer didn't say that, which means that you're saying my neighbor to the left and my wife misheard the officer, or worse, made that up. He tells me to question my neighbor to the left about it and to give him a call. I give my pastor neighbor a call, but he doesn't answer and never calls me back. So I text him saying that I plan to ask my left neighbor and I hope that this is all a misunderstanding. I also mentioned that if the officer did say that, then that would be defamation of character, so I want to know what was said. He replies, geez Kyle, what's your goal in all of this? I explained to him that this is not something I want spread around like it has, because I have 3 young kids. I don't want to have to deal with CPS or have my kids be bullied at school for a stinky house or have my reputation soiled over this false nonsense, as my job involves me going to schools around the country and working with teens. He has never replied to this answer. A few days later, I meet up with my left neighbor in my front yard and I talk about everything. I specifically ask him if he was outside and talking to the officer when he left our house from talking to our parents. He said yes. I questioned him on what the officer said, and he said something similar to what my pastor neighbor said, but different enough to know that there is some shenanigans going on. He tells me that the officer told him that the house smelled like MJ when he walked in. He says that he didn't say drug house specifically, but he did say something about MJ. My left neighbor didn't seem to know exactly what was said and was vague about this all. He also said that the officer said our house was known well by the police department. So my wife and I are trying to figure out how we learn the truth because something fishy is going on here. She has a friend that is a cop in another county and he gives us some advice. First, he tells us that there is no way in heck the officer said that to our neighbors. Second, he tells us that we can call the sheriff's department and they will have that same officer give us a call. So, after 3 days of playing phone tag, we finally get in touch with this officer. We start telling him what the neighbors are saying about what he said, and he cuts us off and starts laughing, saying that none of that was ever said. He says, I know what a drug house is, and your house is not it at all. No one knows about your house, and we don't have suspicion of anything at all. Never said it stunk or anything like that. All I said was that the dogs were taken care of, and that the matter was resolved, and then I left. The officer also mentioned that, after leaving my house and talking to my parents, he only talked to the wife of my pastor neighbor. My wife and I are relieved now because we were able to confirm that the officer didn't actually say this, but now we are left with another problem. How the heck do we approach this from here? We are 100% for sure that our left neighbor and the wife of our pastor neighbor were lying and making crap up about my house and our family. I don't understand why though. I'm not sure about our pastor neighbor. I feel that he didn't know much and was just being honest the first time that I talked to him in the front yard. After the text messages the day after, I'm not sure if he learned that his wife lied about everything and is trying to hide it, or if he is still clueless on the truth. All I know is that this is freaking nuts. It's been about a week since we've talked to the officer, but I'm not sure how to handle this from here. I'm not sweeping this under the rug. I want to confront them in some capacity and let them know that we know the truth. But it's a mess because I'm friends with my pastor neighbor, not so sure anymore, and I'm not trying to throw a wrench in this guy's marriage, but his wife sputtering this crap about us for no reason is crazy. So here I am, asking for help on how to handle this appropriately, as well as hear your theories. This comment suggests, time to tell the pastor, thanks for telling us your wife has a drinking problem. That explains the lies she's spreading. Would you like the phone number for the officer that was here? He will tell you what actually happened. Also, we'll be installing cameras, so warn your wife to stop trespassing. Neighbor's landlord gave someone permission to cut down my trees. Hey everyone, I am very upset over what went down today on my property without my consent. I own my property in upstate New York in a city, and the lot next to me has 2 duplexes on it. The duplex in the back of the lot is built right up along our property line and border, which is pretty normal. There have been multiple tenants there over the past few years that have thrown their trash out their windows into my backyard, but that's beside the point. This afternoon, I looked out my back window and saw a ladder set up in my yard to get to their roof and a decent chunk of trees gone from my yard. I immediately went outside to take pictures of everything and to call my partner. My yard is now also covered in nails and old shingles, and a couple of my trees were trimmed where they crossed the property line, which I know is legal and fine. I don't care about those. But 3 of my trees were completely cut down to the stump and discarded also in my backyard. One of the roofers saw me take the pictures and came down to tell me that the owner of the property they were working on said to just cut away anything in their way, pointed out that the trees were only 3 to 4 inches in diameter each, so not a big deal, and said that if I wanted, he would go to Home Depot and buy me new trees on the spot. I've never met the neighboring landlord and in no way gave him permission to come onto my property, let other people onto my property, or to cut down my trees. I got his contact information and spoke to him over the phone. He claimed that he had tried to talk to me but couldn't because I was never home. I have a full-time job, and when I pointed out that he had no permission to cut my trees, he threatened to sue me because another tree that they had trimmed had allegedly caused damage to said roof. I was never notified or approached about that in the past. My backyard is very small, but part of the appeal for my partner and I is that it's very green and has a lot of trees and vines that keep it shaded, somewhat private, and naturally beautiful in an otherwise overcrowded and gray area of the city, and now a chunk of that has been stripped away. I'm meeting with a family friend that works in local code enforcement tomorrow, but my parents think I should just let it go. Meanwhile, I'm just so upset and stressed and anxious about this, and I know tree law is kind of a big deal, so I was hoping someone here could let me know if there's something I can pursue, and if I should be worried about him countersuing for those supposed roof damages. Do you agree with this answer? The roofer offered to buy you new trees because he knows he is big time screwed. New York tree laws are nothing to laugh at. New York law allows for a penalty of 3 times the timber value, or $250, or both, for each tree removed without owner permission, plus whatever city laws were broken. Consult a property attorney ASAP. Do you think lawyering up is the best thing to do here? Let me know. Sue Karen, she towed my deployed brother's car off our property with an update. Click the video on your screen so you find out what happens to Karen, and I'll see you there.